بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي السودان وفي سوريا وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وأعوانه وأنصاره وإخوانه إلى يوم الدين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. Okay, so we are starting from here today. The scientific view of nature. But let's go back a bit to keep the continuity. So according to Whitehead, therefore nature I think we already talked about what was the role of therefore here. I don't remember now, but you can go back and look at it. And we'll go back if need be. So according to Professor Whitehead, therefore, nature is not a static fact situated in an adynamic void. So nature is not a static fact. Nature is dynamic. In other words, nature is being formed. It's not fully formed. Or depending on your metaphysics, it's being formed. It is not complete. It is being realized. It's not realized fully. It is expressing itself. It hasn't expressed itself fully. That sort of thing. And Allam Iqbal, was very much enamored with this dynamic view of the universe, and we find its expression in his poetry as well as his prose. But so according to Professor, nature is not a static fact situated in an adynamic void, but a structure of events. Possessing the character of continuous creative flow. That's basically Iqbal's his own view, and Whitehead has similar view, but I don't know whether Whitehead actually express it in these terms: continuous creative flow. That's something. Continuous creative flow. That's Iqbal's own view. So the nature is continuous creative flow. So it's not just but so for example, Iqbal would be very happy with a view that universe is expanding. But for Iqbal, it's not just expansion but creative flow. There's something continuously coming out of nothing. If we take creation in its literal sense. So, but a structure of events. So they are events, but events which are interrelated. So they are not haphazard. That's what structure means here, I think. So, a structure of event possessing a character of a continuous creative flow. So, this sort of thought is, I mean, that is related to Iqbal's Islamic view, but it's quite compatible with Hegelian view and Whitehead's view. As long as we don't take creation in a literal sense, because I don't think for Hegel, um, the journey of the self-realization of the Geist or the worldly spirit is a continuous creative overflow. It's just something. It's more of a realizing the potential which is already there. So potential is being converted into actuality. Nothing is coming out of nothing. Nothing is coming out of nothing. um, so the pun not intended. So nature is not a static fact situated in an adynamic void, but a structure of event possessing the character of a continuous creative flow. And thought in that way is the one which imposes, and obviously this continuous creative flow, if we set aside creation business, is also very Heraclitean, which makes sense because but the thought is, or a particular type of thought actually uh, imposes on this continuous creative flow some sort of uh, um, imposes what's the word I'm looking for? So thought is the one which imposes repose, I guess, or imposes a stationary situation. So nature is actually continuous creative flow which thought cuts up into isolated immobilities. But this immobility is imposed by thought or a particular type of thought. So this is also compatible with Kantianism of a sort. So immobility is out of whose mutual relation arise the concept of space and time, mutual relation. Immobilities, and immobilities here would be concepts. So here, according to Iqbal, nature is creative flow, continuous creative flow. And thought is which imposes, let's say, order on this flow, continuous creative flow. Um, and thought does it through concepts and categories. And this overall picture although obviously Kant wouldn't say that nature is a creative, continuous flow, because that would be thing in itself, which is beyond our thought. Um, that's why Alam Iqbal and Hegel and all these people who claim that, post-Kantians who claim that nature's continuous creative overflow, they have to go back to some sort of intuition which um, Kant had rejected. So this is the picture of nature is. So nature is creative flow which thought cuts up into a isolated immobilities out of which mutual relations arise, out of whose mutual relation arise the concept of space and time. So space and times are concepts. So in Kantian terms, they are forms of intuition. So they are not out there. They are impositions of our thought. Thus, we see how modern science utters agreement with Berkeley's criticism, which it once regarded as an attack on its very foundation. Now, there are two things which should be noted here. Firstly, I don't think science cares about Berkeley or any other philosopher of science as such. And I'm not sure in what sense modern science utters its agreement with Berkeley, because for Berkeley accepts Lockean empiricism and tries to argue from there that there can't be an inanimate matter, a substance behind bundle of or collections of ideas in the Lockean sense, which Locke called substance, if we accept Locke's empiricism. But science doesn't necessarily accept Locke's empiricism, and science doesn't have to face Berkeley at all. So this is Iqbal the philosopher trying to bring in science here, saying that Berkeley's rejection of obviously rejection of an independent matter which is static and which exists despite or prior to our thought and our concepts and our ideas, is incompatible with the concept of nature as, or I don't know whether it is incompatible, but it is at least at loggerhead with this concept of nature as continuous creative flow. So what we can say is that Berkeley's views can be more congenial to this notion of nature as continuous creative flow, because then nature would be basically ideas in God's mind, and God is a creative agent, so what he's constantly creating these ideas, and that's what nature is. On the other hand, a mechanistic concept of universe or concept of nature is less compatible with or less congenial to this conception. And since Berkeley sort of deconstructed that concept of matter, Iqbal's find Berkeley's thought congenial, but that has nothing to do with modern science. Or I don't think, I mean, the philosopher of science or some scientists might have been bothered or unbothered by Berkeley's philosophy, but science as a practice can live with a lot of different worldviews, as we know. So you can live with Newton's mechanistic universe, as well as Einstein's relativistic expanding universe, as well as quantum universe at the same time. And physics has never resolved the tensions. And I don't think most physicists are bothered about these tensions unless you are a theoretical physicist working on the border of theory and philosophy, theoretical physics and philosophy. For example, string theory and all those things. So Iqbal's bringing in science here is mostly his own agenda rather than the agenda of science as such. But what Iqbal is saying is science was based on a concept of nature as inanimate matter which follows mechanistic laws of motion, and that concept of nature is incompatible with and hinders to a concept of nature as creative, continuous creative flow. But science's own internal problem, as well as critique of philosophers like Berkeley, helped to deconstruct the notion of such materialism or materialism, yeah. And science's own development, which are somehow reflected in Whitehead's concept of process reality, or a concept of creative, continuous, overflowing nature. So that shows that science actually agrees with Berkeley now. Berkeley's criticism, which once regarded the attack on its very foundation. Thus, we see how modern science utters agreement. But what Whitehead has to do with modern science, very hard to understand. But he's not a scientist at all. He was a mathematician and then turned into philosophy. He did write books on philosophy of science, but that doesn't make him scientist. And his view of science is just one version of what science is, and that is surely not the view of practicing scientists or physicists, or not majority of them, or wasn't the view of the majority of them, or I would hazard that it's not the view of the majority of them even today. So it doesn't make much sense as regard to science, but it does make sense as regard to Iqbal's conception of science and Iqbal's conception of nature and Iqbal's criticism of Newtonian physics, etc. So here we should read it as the fact that Iqbal thinks there is a view of nature based on Newtonian physics, which is incompatible with his version of modernist Islamic religious worldview. But he sees, and that the science was based on. And science for him is important because science is, remember, essentially bequeathed to or given to the world by Muslims, and basically was inspired by the Quran, according to him. So it is his. For him, it is important that science should be presented in the way which is compatible with his vision of what Islam and Quran are saying. And so he sees a new philosophy of nature as a continuous creative overflow, as propounded by Whitehead and Hegel, and which for him is seconded by or confirmed by new physics as practiced by Einstein and quantum physics and all those things. And since the old science was and its conception of matter was criticized by Berkeley, and since Berkeley's conception of matter is compatible with and close to Paul's own notion of matter as continuous creative overflow, Berkeley becomes his ally against his supposed old science and in favor of supposed new physics. So the basic thing is this conception of nature, which is apparently compatible with the Islamic worldview. So these are Allama Iqbal's intention there, or his overarching purpose. So that's how I think we should read this, rather than telling us anything about science or nature or Whitehead or Berkeley, etc. as such. Okay, so basically we just charted the same thing which we had already done, and we stopped at the same place, but with a more, I think, with a better handle on what was going on. So we'll stop here, and next time we'll start from the scientific of nature's pure materiality is. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين.